Hello. Okay, so Passover is about a month to 6 weeks away. Got to check the calendar a little more closely. For reasons unknown, I started thinking about the plague of frogs. Not quite sure why. I just had some interesting thoughts about it, so I thought, okay, maybe I should do some videos about all the plagues. So, um, been working on another project. It's come to a good conclusion point for now, so I'll probably be doing videos a little more often for a while. I think I might be able to get through the 10 plagues before Passover actually starts. So we're not actually going to deal with the plague of frogs today. Today we're going to go with the rivers turning to blood. Start with the first plague, of course. So what's going on here? We got Exodus 3 to 4 as Moses goes to the burning bush, gets the message from God to go back to Egypt and set the people free. Um, Exodus 4 specifically, God starts to give him signs to give to Pharaoh. So first off, throw your staff to the ground; it'll turn to a serpent. Second, put your arm into your tunic or whatever, to your bosom. It says it'll turn leprous. And then third, if he still doesn't believe those two, take 2 jars of water from the river, pour it out, and it'll turn to blood on the ground. So Moses goes back to Egypt. First, he meets with the elders of the Israelites, shows them the 3 signs. And it's not until 7th chapter that he actually goes to Pharaoh. He goes to Pharaoh. He tells him to let the people go. Pharaoh says no, puts more burdens on the people, makes them work harder. The people complain again because now, thanks Moses, you told us you're gonna get us out of here, and we got to work harder. So we finally get to chapter 7, and here he goes back, verse 9 through 13. He does the trick with the snake. Throws the staff down, it turns to a snake. The court magicians do the same with their staffs, turn into snakes. Moses' snake eats their snakes, and then it turns back to a staff. And I only bring this up because, like I said, he showed the 3 signs to the elders of Israel. Then, for reasons unknown, he only showed the snake, these staff to a snake, to Pharaoh, and then he left. Then we start in the next verse, and God says, "Okay, now you're going to go and you're going to turn the rivers to blood." So it seems to contradict a little bit, except for the fact that he did show the signs to some people. He just didn't show them all directly to Pharaoh for reasons unknown. And some people are going to say, there you go, the Bible's contradicting itself. You can't believe it. I would say, on the other hand, there's sort of some rapid fire contradiction here. Some scribe would have noticed this in time and tried to correct it. So I think this is probably more translation error than anything else. It said such and such, and we translated it wrong, and so it looks like it said something else. And I don't know Hebrew well enough to try and prove that, but just the fact that these supposed contradictions are happening back to back, and no scribe said that's a contradiction, makes me think that this is more a translational error than an actual contradiction in some cases. And yes, we can argue that all around, and people are going to say, yeah, you religious types, you just want to write things off to translation errors. Despite the fact that stuff like evolution contradicts itself, and the Big Bang contradicts itself, and science is actually proving all this stuff more wrong than correct, and the evolutionists and the anti-religious people don't want to talk about that. So I don't feel guilty about this. But anyway, so we get to the actual river to blood. Now, The Ten Commandments. Charleston Heston. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right. They didn't actually go to the river. They were basically in the palace, and there was this pool there, and he dipped the staff in it, and it turned to blood. And actually looked that up online, and yes, they did have canals leading to the palaces, and they did have fountains and pools. So the palaces were in fact connected to the Nile in some cases. Um, so that was actually historically accurate to what they did. So were they actually down by the river, or were they in the palace dipping it into a canal connected to the river? Yeah, either one. Let me see. I believe it says yes. I will smite with the rod that is my hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. So that can mean he's striking the river directly, or it can mean that he's striking the waters that come from the river. You know, again, not a Hebrew expert, but I'm willing to say that makes sense either way. And yeah, sorry, I got my Bible down here because I don't want to get paint on it. Um, and the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the waters of the river. Now, I bring that up because there are some people who want to say, okay, it didn't really turn to blood. It was this was red clay, and it wasn't. It just looked like blood, and they called it blood, but it wasn't really blood. So there's a lot of problems with that theory. One specifically being, if this was just red clay, then wouldn't this be a normal occurrence? I mean, it's the Nile. They were dependent on the Nile flooding for their agriculture, so this idea of there being more or less red clay at times would make perfect sense. They would have been very aware of the state of the Nile. So if red clay formed in it on a natural basis, then Moses turning the water to blood or clay, as the case is presented, wouldn't matter. It would be like, so what? That happens every year. So the idea, some people want to say it wasn't turning to blood, it was just red clay, doesn't make sense. Red clay is somewhat natural. Would it kill the fish off? Probably not. Would it stink? Probably not. Now there was the red tide syndrome, where you get an algae which is reddish in color, and that can have all sorts of effects. So maybe something like that would explain it, but at the same time, that would still be a miracle of sorts, because it's not just where did this algae suddenly come from? So it's not just a it's a natural occurrence with miraculous causes behind it, if it is a red tide thing. And that could explain the fish dying, that could explain the stink too, but at the same time, the Egyptians understood medicine. From what all I've read, they were less squeamish about bodily fluids than some other ancient cultures, so they were familiar with blood. So if they thought it turned to blood, then it probably turned to blood. Okay, and the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, take thy rod and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt. So this is not just the river, this is the waters of Egypt. Upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon all their pools of water, and they may become blood. And that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessel of wood and in vessel of stone. So this was, according to that, this was more than just the river turning to blood. This was, I have a barrel of water at home for whatever reason. It's makes perfect sense. They would have kept water nearby so they don't have to go to the river every day. It turns to blood, even though it's not in connection with the Nile. I bring this up because A, the Bible says it, and B, it's like the next couple of verses it talks about, okay, the magicians of Egypt do the same thing. So, wait a second, if all the bloods turn to, or if all the waters turn to blood, then what did the magicians turn to blood? And so here, I'm willing to look at it and say the time order's a little off. So, they did it, the magicians did it, and then God said, okay, I'll do one better than that. Now just wave the rod around and all the water will turn to blood. So they did the river first. So the magicians brought water and said, blood. And God said, okay, we'll do this from a distance. Blood throughout the land. That would make sense. But again, reading it from the Bible, it was the magicians did theirs after Aaron did all the blood and water in the vessels and stuff. So, willing to say that yes, might have been a time difference because the King James translation of verbs is a little sketchy at times. So, saying something happened and saying that something had happened, and there are different. In English we have different verb tenses. Especially for past tense. Something happened, something had happened, something has happened. And it has a different meaning, but when you go to the Hebrew, it's sort of the same words are being used. So it could be, okay, we touched the river, it turned to blood. God said, have Aaron do this. And then the next verse would be, and then the magicians had done it. So it's, again, back to the whole, did the river, the magicians did their trick, and God said, okay, now we're just going to do the whole land. That would make sense. And again, well, it sounds like you're doing verbal acrobatics to try to make it sound like, well, again, the Hebrew and English don't match up perfectly, especially when it comes to past tense verbs. So that suggestion actually makes sense, and it wouldn't be a contradiction. What else? So the Egyptians had nothing to drink, so they dig around the river to try to find water. This goes back to the whole, well, maybe this was all just dirt, or maybe it was all clay. It seems to me that if the water is contaminated with clay, then digging for water, you really wouldn't hope to find uncontaminated water. All the Bible says is they dug around the river to look for it. They didn't say they actually found water. That's one thing interesting is, did they actually find water when they dug for it or not? It just says they dug for water. Did they dig a pit and find, blood? We don't know. So what did they do for 7 days? Because it all ends with, and 7 days were fulfilled. After that, the Lord had smitten the river. Now, nowhere in the narrative does it say, I'm going to turn the water to blood and it will be blood for 7 days. It just says, 7 days were fulfilled. And there's actually nothing where Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let the people go, just turn the water back. It's just 7 days were fulfilled, back to water. Which is sort of odd. That's sort of, you read the whole narrative of the 10 plagues, and that sort of stands out as different than all the others. So, again, there's some stuff, this, about half a chapter describing what happened for a week. There's a lot that happened that the Bible just doesn't tell us. It just wasn't written down, so maybe Moses did tell Pharaoh, this is going to be this way for 7 days, and they just didn't write it down. Or maybe they never said that, and the Bible just tells us this at the end. We don't know. That's one thing about the Bible is there's a lot of things you read the Bible and it's like there's a three-line conversation which in reality would probably take 10 to 15 minutes to actually hash through. But the Bible doesn't necessarily tell us all of what happened in the conversation. It just hits the high points. What appears to be a direct quote might not be a direct quote. It might just be a summary, which looks like a direct quote. That's one thing we can learn from this. And I know some people say this sounds blasphemous and you're saying bad things about the Bible. No, it just actually makes perfect sense, especially when you read the Bible and think how would normal people react under these situations. Wouldn't people be asking more questions than this? And the answer is, in reality, yes. In several cases, they would be, but the Bible only gives the highlights in some cases. So that's it with the water to blood. Again, we don't know how it resolved other than the fact that it was fulfilled for 7 days and then it's over. There was no great put the staff in the river again and it turns back to normal. There was no wave, it just came back to normal. That's one of those things when you go into, the Bible's full of contradictions. No, there's just a lot the Bible doesn't tell us. And it's not necessarily contradicting, it's just that information that would tell the contradiction or resolve the contradiction just wasn't given. Doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it a little frustrating at times. So that is it for the water turning to wine, or not the water turning to blood. Got the wrong miracle going there. Tomorrow we will actually get into the plague of frogs and how I got onto this idea. But other than that, have a nice day.